Thank you so much, Evelyn and Herman, for joining us in time. I'm sure you already know my name's Evelyn. I'm Serah Muindi, and I'm today going to be presenting on psychological first aid. But before we begin, perhaps we will start with hearing how your week has been, and then we can be able to continue within the next 4 minutes, so that we start at exactly 9:04 with the presentation. So I will start with Sheila. Sheila, please unmute. You're welcome to the meeting. Let us know how you are and how your week has been.
Okay, so good morning.
Good morning.
My week has been okay, a little bit slow, but can't complain about it. It has been okay. And I think I don't have anything really noteworthy to talk about, but I've just enjoyed, I think, that week with the circumstances that came with the other week. So yeah, my week has been very slow and very okay.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much, Sheila. Evelyn, you can unmute and let us know how your week has been like.
Okay, thank you, Serah. My week has been a busy one, but I've been managing, and we're struggling with the cold in Nairobi. It's too cold. It's real winter. You can see how we are dressed. So all is well, and I look forward to the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. We are sorry that you're freezing. Over here, the sun is out. We are excited to be enjoying the sun. Thank you, Evelyn.
Enjoy while it lasts. Enjoy while it lasts.
Yes, we intend to. Herman, you're welcome. Please unmute and introduce yourself and let us know how your week was like. Okay, as we are giving Herman a few minutes, I will welcome. All right, yeah, you've unmuted. Go ahead, Herman. Okay, we'll give Herman a few seconds as he sorts out the connectivity. Nadine, you're welcome. Please introduce yourself and tell us how your week has been.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Nadine. My week has been good. Currently far where I live at night right now. So I don't want to meet like so much people around.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nadine. Let's go to Murugi. Murugi, please unmute and tell us how your week has been.
Morning. So my name is Murugi. My week has been a bit busy from last week till today, but I'm glad that I'm trying to balance, and I'm really taking care of my mental health amidst the busyness of life. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Murugi. Lilian Odhiambo, please unmute and let us know how your week was, and then we will begin the presentation.
Morning team. I'm Lilian. My week has been interesting. I thought I was a bit off. I thought I would rest, but I think that's a dream. So I'm back disoriented, but I think I don't know when I'll catch up. So I'm just there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lilian. We are sorry about the fact that you have not had a chance to rest. I hope that over the coming days, maybe you will be able to prioritize a few minutes in the week to rest a little bit. Thank you so much to each of you that has joined us today. I will be presenting on psychological first aid. My name is Serah Muindi, and I'm the founder of Hopewell Counseling Farm. I'm going to request Sheila to help me in doing the technical moderation. So checking on the comments, checking on people that have raised their hands so that she can be able to alert me and we will be able to proceed together. So for the direction we will be taking with our presentation today, it's going to be a mix of knowledge sharing and experience sharing. So I'll be requesting that we are as active as possible. You are free to raise your hand if you have a comment or question. You're also free to use the chat in case you're not in a position to speak, or in case there's a question or a comment you want to give as we are continuing. This session is recorded and will be shared with each of you for purposes of future reference, and also to be able to allow you the resources that will be shared as well. So after we end the session, we'll share the recording. We'll also share the resource material that I'll make reference to in the presentation, and also the poster for our next CPD session. If you would like to be a presenter, you are welcome to let us know. We have a schedule out already with some of the topics that we'll be addressing. You can pick on one of the topics that has already been shared by some of the counselors you have asked, or if you have a different topic as well, you're welcome to request that we have it as well. And also, when you share the topic that you have in mind, once you're slotted in the schedule for the presentation, one of the team members from the farm will moderate as you present, so that you are also well briefed about how to structure the presentation. Thank you to each of you that has joined. I'm going to share my screen so that we can begin. So psychological first aid is, I think, something that became very proactive, or it became a tool for us as professionals to use a lot more after COVID, because of the fact that there are several institutions, both locally and globally, that have structured a psychological first aid document. So we have one by the Ministry of Health, we have one by World Health Organization, and I will be sharing both of them with you at the end of this session. You'll receive them with the CPD resources. So for today's CPD session, I'll be using the PFA guideline that was structured by the World Health Organization after just when COVID started, and because of the kind of disaster that was being experienced in the world. But I will give context with my personal experience in providing PFA. I'm also welcoming you to give context as well and share examples, questions, thoughts, comments on the same. Of course, you can see it's a big page document, it's 64 pages, but I'll only focus on defining what PFA is and what it's not, and when, who, where we provide PFA, and then I'll give some of the examples from my own experience. This session is going to be, it's usually an hour, but this time I will count down at the 40-minute mark. So once the link expires, we are inviting you to rejoin so that you can be able to conclude together. Okay, so psychological first aid. I'll begin with an example. In 2021, I received a phone call at 3 a.m. from someone who was suicidal, and they had reached their end, and they called me and they said, I just called this number as a last resort before I kill myself. And then if you were to answer or not to answer, I just wanted someone to know that, that I'm going to kill myself, and this was my last effort. So that was a call I received at 3 a.m. Of course, it jolted me awake, and so I had to provide psychological first aid. Now, what the WHO defines psychological first aid to be, it is how we provide services or how we respond when somebody is suffering and they're in need of support. So it's practical care and support. It's assessing what are their needs and concerns. It's helping people address basic needs depending on the kind of crisis that they are going through or the kind of disaster that they are experiencing or the kind of suffering they are going through. Listening to them, but not pressuring them to talk, giving people comfort and helping people to feel calm and helping them to feel connected to information, to resources, and also to social support, as well as protecting people who are in crisis or who are suffering from further harm. And that is why me receiving a call from someone who was suicidal at 3 a.m., I could not tell them, can I call you tomorrow morning? Because there's a big probability that by tomorrow morning, they may have already taken their lives. So it's also protecting people who are suffering from further harm. And that, of course, informs how you as an individual respond. What PFA is not. So it is not something that only us as professionals can provide. Lay community members that do not have psychological expertise can also provide PFA. It is not counseling. Psychological first aid is not counseling. Why? Because you cannot goal set when someone has called and told you that they were calling you because they wanted at least one person to know before they kill themselves. So you cannot start to goal set in that environment. It is not debriefing. Why? Because debriefing involves a detailed description of the situation, but psychological first aid is not debriefing. Why? Because we do not pressurize people to talk, and most of the time, psychological debriefing focuses on the event, what has happened, what is their experience, and the narrative, and helping the client process what they have experienced by then giving context and sharing the narrative. So it is also not asking somebody to analyze what has happened to them or put time and events in order. That's why it's not debriefing and it's not counseling, because the client is in such distress that they are not able to give you a chronological account of what has happened. Most of the time, if it's a disaster that as a counselor you are responding to, let me use the example of Shakahola, and a family member or you have been called to go and respond, you may, when you're offering PFA, you are not likely to tell the client to give you the details of when they joined that movement or that church, because they may not be remembering what has happened, or they may not be able to give you context in that order. Also, PFA involves being available to listen to people's stories. So they may give, let me give a different example of a fire. So a fire has erupted and a home is burning. The person that you're offering PFA to may not give you the experience of how the fire started. Because of the disorganization in their thought process, they are likely to start telling you the story of their child when they were born. And so you'll find that when you're offering PFA, it is not trying to get the client to come to terms with what they're losing. It is actually offering a safe space for the person to share what they are experiencing. And so it is a safe space to listen. And you go with the questions that the client is, you go with the flow of the direction that the client seeks. If the client starts to talk about their child, while the fire is going, their house is literally burning down, you ask them about the child. Okay, how old was the child? How old is this child? What do you like about this child? Ni nini imekusumbua? What has disturbed you about this child? So you go with the story that the client is in the present connected to, because as I've already described, PFA is not counseling, PFA is not debriefing. It is offering care and support to stabilize the mental state of the client in the moment. And then once the client is stabilized, with time, then you can introduce psychological debriefing, or you can introduce counseling once the client is in a more stable mental and emotional state. If you disagree, please type in the comment and tell me, how about in this scenario? Or I disagree, this is my perspective. If you agree, please give me a thumbs up in the chat so that I can know that we are together and that the content that I am giving is value adding for you. And then as we are also proceeding, we will come back to the comments as well. So the idea with PFA is to help the person, the client, to feel connected, to feel calm, and to feel hopeful. The other idea is that they are able to have access to social, physical, and emotional support. And lastly, that they are able, you as a therapist are able to help them. You're able to support them so that they are in a situation to help themselves or to help other people or to help the community members. So we provide PFA to people who are in distress. People who are in distress maybe because of different circumstances, and there are some that that were listed here that I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much for the thumbs up, Murugi. We are together. If you are together, please give me a thumbs up so that I can be able to know that we are moving in tandem. So we provide PFA to people who are in serious, who have experienced serious or life-threatening injuries, or who may need emergency care. So if you are responding as a counselor in a disaster, if you are responding to a car accident, if you are responding to a burning home, if you are responding to a place that has flooded. So people who have experienced serious or life-threatening injuries, and they're in need of emergency care, they receive PFA. People who are so upset that they cannot care for themselves or care for their children. An example of people that are normally in this scenario is an example of people that are going through loss and grief. Somebody whose loved one has died, somebody whose colleague has died, for example. So that's another category of people we provide PFA to, people who may hurt themselves. So when somebody calls, like my 3 a.m. call and says, I want to kill myself, I was calling you as my last resort. I had another example of another individual who called me during the day and told me, I'm calling you because I wanted at least one person to know that I have died. And this was a 40-year-old, over 40-year-old adult male. And they called and I asked them, okay, all right, so I'm here and I'm listening. And he said, yeah, so I was calling to tell you that at least one person, so that at least kuna mtu mmoja, one person will know that I have died once I have killed myself. So people who want to hurt themselves, and also people who may hurt themselves. So those who have exhibited a self-harming behavior, or those who have exhibited are at risk of self-harm, are people to whom we provide PFA. Most of the time, because they reach out, immediately they are thinking about suicidal behavior or self-harming behavior, or most of the time, they are reaching out because they have thought about it or they are about to harm themselves, and so they are calling. It is actually a cry for help, but they are at risk. So these are the kind of people to whom we provide PFA. Then PFA is provided when an individual reaches out, for example, to you as a professional, and they're in crisis. It's also provided to people when there is a disaster that's happening. I'll use the example of there was an accident on the road a few years ago, and there was a trailer that exploded that was carrying oil. And so in counselors responding, that is an instance or a situation when PFA would have needed to be provided. So it's provided when people have immediately been affected by a crisis. That's what you do in the moment. It's actually PFA. It's not debriefing, and it's definitely not counseling. So that's when we provide the services. And where you provide these services, oftentimes when it is a disaster scenario, the responding community members and the responding emergency care units, for example, the ambulance, for example, the fire brigade, for example, if it's a refugee scenario, when people are responding community, there is normally some designations. People will put some tents, some people will put some seats, some people will just automatically designate an area. There are no seats, there is no tent, there is no structure, but that is where people are being redirected to who are experiencing an emergency. So you may provide PFA services on the ground where an event or a disaster has happened. You may provide PFA in a hospital setting. You may provide PFA in a clinic. You may provide PFA on phone, especially if somebody that is in need calls you. So that is who we provide PFA services to, and where we provide these services from, and when we provide PFA services to community members or people that are in need of these services. Most of the time, PFA is provided immediately after a crisis or a disastrous event, a few days later, maybe a week later. So it is how it's the psychological emergency response. So it's normally a day or at most a few weeks after an event has happened. I will also say that sometimes we also provide PFA in scenarios that may not involve self-harm, but may involve deep crisis. For example, for somebody that may have lost a huge amount of money and they call in distress, or somebody who is under severe stress, for example, at their workplace, and is so distressed that they cannot take care of their mental health, then that is also a time when we provide PFA services. So this is what I wanted to briefly capture in this session. This resource tool has a lot more information on PFA, but I wanted us to just differentiate the two and know the scenarios when we are providing PFA. We'll also come into the practicality of it and how we actually provide PFA, and that is what I wanted to share for now in this brief presentation. Then I'm going to stop sharing my screen and share how I handled the scenario with someone who was suicidal, and then I will open it up to you to also share your experiences in having supported people that are in different levels of crisis or suffering, and what you have been able to do that was helpful and what was not helpful. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen just now, and then I'm going to give now context of my experience. So when I received this phone call at 3 a.m., first of all, for me as a practicing therapist, when I offer PFA, I normally, especially for clients that are suicidal, presenting with suicidal thoughts or behavior, or are at risk, I normally give them access to myself. So it means they will call and they will text and I will respond, at least for a minimum of 24 hours. Why? Because of Suicide Watch. And that window is really, really critical for helping clients to stabilize. So I received this call from this, I'll use the example of the 40-plus-year-old man who called in the morning and said he was going to kill himself, and he called me as a last resort, just to, before he dies, at least one person will know that he has died. So I asked him, okay, so you want to end your life, and you wanted me to know, I don't know what your name is, so what's your name? And the person told me their first name. I was like, okay, I'm glad to meet you and thank you for calling me. And now that you have decided that you want to die, how are you planning to do this? And he said he was intending on shooting himself. And I asked him, okay, do you already have a gun, or how are you going to shoot yourself? And he said he has an issued gun. He has identified where he's going to shoot himself, and he has identified the time. It was supposed to be that day. He was calling me, and then he's going to kill himself. So I was like, okay, that's quite the plan. And then I asked him, tell me a little bit about yourself. Are you married? Do you have children? And he said he was married and that relationship ended. And now he got into a relationship with someone else who ended that relationship with him when he had proposed to her. And he mentioned he had 3 children. And so we continued with this conversation. So I asked him how long had he been in the relationship with this lady that had jilted him. And he told me when the relationship had begun. He mentioned in his suicide plan, he had already written a suicide note for her. He had already set his phone and had written a note for her, for the family, and which was supposed to be sent to who. And then I told him that is not a very good idea, especially the idea of writing a note and sending it to his lover who had just jilted him. Why? Because his entire family would turn against her in case he died. And so we explored what were the implications of the plan. And this, I am saying, we explored in an entire day. So from the morning when he called me, I was literally traveling home to see my mother-in-law. And at some point on the road, we kept talking. So I'm asking all these questions in a matatu full of people wondering, okay, what is going on here? And I kept asking all these questions just to understand him a bit better, to understand the degree of the severity and to listen to him. And so by the time I was alighting, I had to, he told me, thank you so much for having listened to me. I wish you the very best. And I said, okay, thank you as well. And I went into panic mode because I knew that this individual is now going to end their life. And because I was telling them that I need to alight. I had arrived at my destination. This was about 2.5 hours later, and I needed to get off the bus, talk to a motorbike person so that I can get home, and then we can continue the conversation. And so I said, what I'm going to do is, I'm about to alight from the car. What I'm going to do is, once I alight and get home, I will call you. If you answer, I will be glad that you're alive, and we will continue this conversation. So I got home. I did call him back and he answered. And I knew we've gotten at least through the first 6 hours. This person is still alive. And so we continued with offering PFA for that entire day. He called me all the way to midnight, all the way at 3 a.m. and he kept pushing the time for when he was going to end his life. So we did the first 12 hours, then we did the next 24 hours. But he was still very set on taking his own life. And so by the time he called on a Monday, so I did PFA Monday, Tuesday, was still PFA. Wednesday, I had exhausted all of my resources. I still did not have an emergency contact. This individual was highly intellectual, had completely refused to tell me the location of where he intended to take his life. He had refused to tell me who had given him my number, but mentioned that it was somebody that knew me. And so I was at a loss because I did not know where he was located. I did not know even who to contact as an emergency contact. And so on day 3, on the Wednesday, I called a psychology friend of mine who holds a master's in suicidology to be able to now help me. So I told my now client that, okay, so I will have one last request before now you end your life, because he had now moved from, at least we had finished 24 hours watch, and I was a bit certain that he might be alive and he might live. So we waited. On the Wednesday during the day at around 1, I requested him that that he talks to my colleague who is a suicidologist, and maybe if she's able to help. So he said, it's fine, I'm going to talk to her simply because you have requested. He called the suicidologist. She listened to him, and then she called me back and told me, Serah, you have done your best. Sometimes this is the most you can do, and you have to separate that once you have done your best, that the decision to live or die for that individual is theirs. Because even her, she had not gotten his emergency contact, absolutely no way of intervening. And so when he called me back, I asked him, what was your thoughts? What did you think about the conversation you had with the suicidologist? And he said, she's really good, but she also wants me to leave. And I said, of course she wants you to leave. So do I. So do the rest of us. He is still alive, this gentleman who is over 40 years old, up to date. What I think was the turning point is that he started to see that there are people that care, that there are people that are concerned. For me, one of the things that helped me was asking for support, because I had reached my end. I had exhausted all my skills. I had exhausted all my tools for helping a client who is suicidal. And so asking for support is one of the important things that I did that helped me in terms of intervening and continuing to provide PFA to this client. So that was my experience in providing PFA. I do not have a magic bullet. I do not have a magic answer, but I am confident and proud that this person is alive even today and is doing well. I do not know about his situation with his family. We did not begin counseling. Why? Because after offering psycho PFA for 3 days, I then recommended that he sees the suicidologist, who is now an expert and will be able to see him after he's stabilized enough to continue with his life. But I did several follow-ups. Just a few days later, the next day, I kept just checking in to know, okay, we have gotten to the morning, we have gotten to the evening, until we ended the week. And then we got into another week. So that was my experience with providing PFA to this client. I want to open this up to us. If you have a question, if you have a thought, if you have a comment, if you have experienced a client that you have provided PFA to, what was your experience like? We can begin by answering that question. If you have a thought or a comment on having been in a scenario where you were helping a client that needed PFA, what was the experience for you and what do you think helped for you? Please raise your hand if you have a PFA experience to share, or if you're unable to speak, you can use the chat option. Does anyone have an experience with providing PFA, and what has your experience been like?
I'd like to ask a question, please.
Yes.
Yeah, so you said, like, for example, in this, you said watch, you need to keep in contact with the client for some time.
Yes.
So my question is, like, what's the content of this session? Because like we said, it's not counseling, it's not debriefing. So are you just listening to them? How exactly, like, what's the conversation like?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, you are just listening to them. Like you said, PFA is essentially giving the individual a space to listen to their stories. So for the over 3 days when I was providing PFA to this client, that was it. Listening to their stories, listening to when he met this lady, listening to what has happened with that relationship, how his family is responding, just asking the questions as he is talking, and allowing him to talk more. So that is the context, is essentially listening to him and also assessing for whether he is stabilizing or not stabilizing based on what he is saying. So I found that by the time we're getting to day 3, the will to die was reducing, and the will to live was starting to increase, simply because of listening and just listening to his stories. Of course, it was very emotionally draining and also very time consuming, because even when I'm in a session, I have to be alert to know if my phone rings and this person called so that I can be able to answer. So that is the context of the conversation. It's only listening to them and asking more and more probing questions, because you have no information about them. And in listening and in asking them more exploratory questions, then you understand their context more, and that then allows you to empathize.
Okay, thank you. That was well answered.
Thank you, Nyambura. Okay, thank you. Joseph Kimeu, you are welcome to unmute and ask your question or share a context you have been in.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I hope I'm audible enough. If you can respond, I agree I'm audible enough. Now,
Yes.
Thank you so much also for this session, PFA, and I'll just go direct to my experience. I work in a multicultural organization whereby we have a lot of people from all walks of cultures. And unfortunately, from among them, we have some of them, I will not be mentioning the nationalities, they are among them who are just prone to suicide. Suicide is like drinking water. To somebody to commit suicide is not something that it's something new. For them, they don't care about life. And I have had many instances, many. I cannot even remember how many. There are many. And this one starts from somebody about relationships. I had an arranged marriage. Oh my God, I just mentioned arranged marriage. Now everybody can comment, can understand from where. Then I don't love the person, and the person is now doing this to me. Okay, I am here, I'm earning this amount of money, and they want everything. And I just feel I don't deserve to live. Then the first thing which I usually do, unfortunately, nobody tells me, it's just that sometimes I'll just get you just by chance, by chance. So I'll give a particular one where I was doing some accommodation inspections, you know, where the accommodations where our employees they are living, we should conduct random and scheduled inspections to be able to prove on some of the things which are there and also listen to the employees. Actually, this one we usually do it as an inspection and also like a safety walk and talk. Like you are doing safety walk and you are talking, you are getting information from the employees. So I bumped to this one particular employee. I was going to do I start from the rooftop. So I went to the rooftop and I find one gentleman is there. He's just pacing around, puffing cigarette, walking. I hid myself because at the rooftop we have the AC machines and all that. So I hid behind. So I needed to know, maybe this gentleman is smoking bang. Number one, I have some police instincts with me, being a former police officer before.
Just a minute, Joseph, just a minute. For context, the timer is running down. Once it expires, we'll use the same link to rejoin.
Okay. So when I hid myself, I had now to spend some little bit of time. The good thing is that he never took too much time before